right upon us, so I have summer desserts on my brain, and one of my favorite things growing up was roasting s'mores on a campfire. So today I wanted to make kind of adult gourmet s'mores for you guys. So traditional s'mores, right, are graham crackers, marshmallows, and Hershey's chocolate, which is delicious. But I'm gonna make it a little bit more adult for us. So I'm gonna make a chocolate chip cookie that I'm gonna add some Clementine Zest to, and then I'm gonna make Clementine flavored marshmallows to go with it, and I'm gonna use a really high quality chocolate. So it's gonna be a little bit more adult, but still very playful and fun, but a little bit more custom. So let's go ahead and get started.
All right, let's make the Clementine marshmallows. So marshmallows are basically made out of water, sugar, and gelatin, and they're going to be whipped up into that texture we associate with marshmallows. So first, we're going to start by blooming our gelatin in a cold liquid. Now, I said water earlier, but you can replace that liquid with more flavorful water. So I'm going to use clementine juice to add just that kick of flavor. So what blooming does is it takes those dehydrated gelatin granules and enlarges them, and it's really important for the final consistency of any gelatin-based product. So what you do is you sprinkle your gelatin over your liquid and then double check to make sure there are any lumps. You can see that I'm kind of smooshing the lumps out as I stir just to make sure there aren't any lumps, because then they won't enlarge properly. And as soon as I've gotten all the lumps out, we'll let it sit for about 3 to 5 minutes, and you'll see just how much the texture changes. It's going to go from this kind of gloopy looking kind of mixture to pretty solid mixture. While our gelatin is blooming, we can go ahead and heat up our sugar mixture. So in this pot, I have clementine juice, which could have been water, but this just adds a little bit extra flavor. It could be replaced with any flavorful liquid that you want. And I also have sugar and corn syrup. And I like to use a combination of both whenever I cook sugar. So granulated sugar likes to stay granulated. That's the form it naturally wants to be in. So if ever a sugar crystal were to fall back in, maybe stuck to the side of the pot or something, it could cause any granulated sugar that had melted to go back into granulated form, which would create kind of crystal texture in your marshmallows, which is not ideal. So corn syrup is a great addition because it's an invert sugar, and invert sugar means that it wants to be liquid. So it kind of helps prevent any crystallization. So what we're doing is we're going to heat this up. So it's brought up to a boil, and basically what's going to happen is our water is going to slowly evaporate, and it's going to give us this really thick sugar syrup mixture that's going to be kind of part of the stabilization in our marshmallows along with the gelatin. So as this cooks, you can see now that there's lots of really fast, rapid bubbles. And as that water evaporates, those bubbles are going to get kind of big and slow. And we have a thermometer in there because we're looking for a specific temperature, and that's 240 degrees, which is known as softball stage. The longer you cook sugar, the firmer it gets. If you cooked it too high, it actually can turn into, once it's cooled, kind of a glass texture, which can be really great in other applications, but not good in this application. So we're looking for that softball texture, which is really important for the texture of our marshmallows. So any lower, and we won't have the same setting properties in our marshmallows. Any higher could either lead to too firm marshmallows or even kind of shards of cooked sugar when we put it into our mixer later. So that temperature is very important. So you can see I've moved the gelatin into my mixer, and look how firm it's gotten. So those granules have gotten really enlarged, which is perfect. So the next thing you have to do with gelatin is you need to heat it up to dissolve it. And a lot of times people will do is cook it maybe over a double boiler to soften it, or also in a microwave, but we can kind of get two birds with one stone. So we need to add our hot sugar syrup immediately after it's gotten to 240 degrees into our mixer. So two birds with one stone is that heat is going to melt our gelatin nicely. You have to be careful though, because gelatin doesn't do well with crazy high heats. And then we need to also cool down our hot sugar syrup. So that's going to slowly happen as it goes into our mixer and it hits the cooler gelatin, and also is being moved around by our whip attachment. It's going to start to cool down. Now, as it's cooling, that whip attachment is going to incorporate air, and that's when it's going to give us that texture that we associated with marshmallows. So when you're doing this, be very careful. Sugar is very, very hot and burns really, really badly. And you also want to make sure you do your best to try to keep your sugar syrup in between your mixer bowl and your whip attachment so it doesn't fling onto the sides of the bowl. And you can see I did a pretty mediocre job as I tried to navigate around my camera. But as soon as we get all of that sugar syrup into our mixer, you can see I've knocked it up to high speed so I can get as much air as possible. And you can see there's tons of steam coming out of my mixer, which just means, there's still a lot of heat. And you can see already it's changing color, it's getting lighter and lighter. And you're going to see soon, even though it was a pretty orange mixture, but because of the clementine juice, soon it's going to be pretty white as it continues to add and whip air. And this does take quite a long time. As you can see, this is a time-lapse version of how long it takes to whip, and you can see me walking around in the back. It takes a very long time for this to whip up, and you can see me touching my hand to the bottom of the bowl, and I'm just checking to see when it's cooled. So while that's whipping up, I need to prepare my dish. And if you think about marshmallows, they kind of always have that kind of powdery exterior. And that's because marshmallows are very sticky on the inside. So we're going to recreate that with some powdered sugar. I've used cornstarch. I've used powdered sugar. I've used a mixture of the two. I don't really have a really strong leaning towards one or the other. Powdered sugar, if you have a little bit of extra still left on there, you haven't gotten it all off, is a lot better than cornstarch though. So I tend to lean towards that. So look how light and fluffy this has turned into. And you can see it's gotten really, really pale. Now, if this was a plain marshmallow, we had used water, it would have been perfectly white. There's a little tinge of orange to it because of the clementine juice, but I want to kind of up it a little bit to get a little bit more orange, but I also don't want it to feel like a little kid either. So I just want it to be like that hint of orange. So I'm adding some food coloring, and I didn't have any orange food coloring at my house, so I'm using a combination of yellow and red. Always great to know how colors work so that you can mix colors when you need to if you don't have the right colors. So as long as you have the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, you can make any colors, which is pretty awesome. But you can't make blue out of something, yellow out of something, or red out of something. So I really wanted this to be just a very light hint of orange, just so it felt a little special and different, but again, not like a child dream color. So as soon as I'm happy with the color, I'm going to take this off the mixer, and then we're going to get it into our prepared pan. All of this stuff needs to happen very, very quickly. All right, so our marshmallows are ready to go into our pan. So I've taken my spatula, and you can see that it's nice and shiny, and that's because I sprayed it with some pan spray, and that's just to help it not stick. So right now, I'm just gonna push my marshmallow out of my whip attachment as much as I can. You can see it's not super sticking. It is sticking a tiny bit to my spatula, but otherwise, if I didn't spray it, it would stick a lot, and I may find that I need to spray it again kind of in the middle of doing this. I don't usually, for marshmallows, I don't fight to get every little bit off of the attachment because I want to work with this quickly to get it out before it's set. So important to work quick because as that gelatin cools, this is going to start to become much firmer. And then we won't get the nice clean top that we might want. And you can see it gets very sticky and stringy, just like you might think that kind of warm marshmallow would be. So once you've gotten it out of the bowl, it's time. All right, again, trying to work as quickly as possible to smooth this out. And it'll be a little trickier because the powdered sugar is going to kind of lift up on the bottom. But if you don't put that powdered sugar in, it'll just stick and you'll never get it out of the pan.
which obviously is not what you want. Just keep going till you get it nice and smooth. It is pretty difficult to get it perfectly smooth. I like to do kind of, whenever I'm trying to get anything smooth, I try to do as big of strokes as I possibly can. So if I do tiny strokes, I'll get lots of tiny little lines. So once I'm happy, and if you want a perfectly smooth top, what you can do is you can actually take this off a little bit earlier when it's hot. You will just kind of sacrifice some of the air. It'll be just a little bit more dense of a marshmallow, but that's your prerogative. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and get some more powdered sugar, and I'm gonna dust the top just like I dusted the bottom. Once these are set, that's gonna make this a lot easier to cut if this is all dusted. It'll also prevent kind of a weird skin forming. And if you think about marshmallows at the grocery store that you get, they kind of have that powdery coating on them. So this is kind of the same idea that they do so that marshmallows don't all stick together in the bag. So once this is really generously coated.
For the gelatin set up all the way, we're gonna wait a couple of hours at room temperature, and if you really are pushed for time, you can do it in the refrigerator for an hour to 2 hours.
So my marshmallows have been chilling and are all set up, so I'm gonna loosen up the edges because they've probably stuck a little bit because I wasn't able to get powdered sugar, you know, on the edges. We'll go around all the way around and loosen up those edges. So now that my edges are all loose, I'm gonna turn it out onto my cutting board. And it might take a little bit of coercing because it is sticky. There we go. There we go. She coming out. Because it's got gelatin in it, it's pretty elastic, so you don't really have to worry about it ripping. All right. So it's time to cut these marshmallows. So I have the longest knife that I have to help make nice long cuts. It's gonna help make for straighter cuts, and hopefully you can see it's a little shiny because I've sprayed it down with some vegetable oil so it can help with my sticking. So I'm gonna trim off the edges because the edges are never very nice. And it may still stick some, that's okay. So you may just have to keep adding pan spray as you go. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut off all the edges. So all of my edges are cut off, so now I can get some nice, clean, straight marshmallows. And as I've kind of gotten more and more stickiness on my knife from the marshmallow, I've just started to cover it in powdered sugar, and that also will help you make sure that the knife's not sticking too much. So however you decide to cut, you want to think about your final product. So I'm going to use these for some s'mores, and I'm going to make the s'mores with some chocolate chip cookies that I made. So this is the size of the cookie. So I want to make it a little bit smaller, so when you kind of smoosh it down, when you push it down, it doesn't ooze like crazy out. So maybe I'm gonna look for a size that's about 1.5 inches wide. So to get really nice and even cuts, best way is kind of, instead of just like cutting here and then all of a sudden you get like this weird cut at the end, it's nice to kind of visualize how you can cut that. So maybe, I think I'll cut this in half, and then I'll cut in thirds from there. And then in between each cut, you can add some more powdered sugar to your knife or pan spray if that's the route you're going. But if you're doing the powdered sugar, you just need to have something for it to adhere to on the knife. So a lot of times I'll kind of just like kind of gauge it so I can try to, especially with thirds. Thirds are always harder than half, so that looks about even to me. Let me just So I'm gonna go ahead and make all those cuts. All right, so I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna take a look and see, and I think I'll cut this in half and then in quarters. So that is in half. And if I do a cut here, and again, make sure I don't have my knife sticking because that's gonna mean for a not very pretty cut. And in half here. So once I get my marshmallows cut to the size I want, and you can see they'll actually kind of start to stick back together because we have powdered sugar here, but we just made these raw cuts. So this is still pretty sticky. So what we're gonna do is we're take some sifted powdered sugar and we're gonna just roll our marshmallows in that. And then what I like to do is put it in a sifter and just kind of shake it off. So it just is gonna leave that kind of film so that they're not sticky anymore. So now it's not sticky at all. And that's my finished marshmallow. So in this bowl I have butter, sugar, and brown sugar, and I'm gonna start the creaming method. So I'm gonna cream it till it's nice and light and fluffy. My butter is soft. So this is start for the traditional creaming method. I'm actually gonna add some orange zest to it. I wanna add it now if I'm gonna add any kind of zest because it's gonna kind of bruise up against all those sugar granules and get even more flavorful. So I'm gonna let it go till it gets nice and light and fluffy. Periodically, you wanna stop and scrape the bowl. And when you're scraping the bowl, make sure you get the bottom of the bowl, the sides of the bowl, and the paddle attachment. So when your butter and sugar mixture has gotten light in color and gotten nice and soft and fluffy, it's time to move on to the next step of the creaming method, and that's to add our eggs gradually. And in this size batch, I only have 1 egg, so I'm actually gonna add it in 2 batches. So if I add all of my egg white, that's gonna be too much water to fat, and it's never gonna come together because water and fat hate each other. But there's emulsifier in the egg yolk, so I need that emulsifier to work. So if I only have 1 egg, I'm gonna kind of lightly mix it together. I'm not trying to beat any air into it, just trying to mix it together. So I'm adding half egg yolk and half egg white, and I'm gonna add about half of it and mix it until it has incorporated all the way. So my first egg addition is incorporated all the way. So I'm gonna scrape my bowl and my paddle. And I'm gonna add the rest of my egg. And now that the emulsifiers have started to have some time to work, I'm gonna add my vanilla, since this is all liquid, there's no emulsifier.
we need to add that later. So I'm gonna mix this until it is incorporated. Our second batch of eggs have already incorporated all the way. So again, I'm gonna scrape my bowl and my paddle, make sure I'm getting the bottom of the bowl. And then my next addition is going to be my dry ingredients. So my dry ingredients for this recipe are flour, baking soda, and salt. So I'm gonna take a whisk and combine them. Once I start to add the flour in, I'm gonna get gluten development. So I wanna mix it as little as possible, but it's really important that the salt and baking soda incorporate really evenly. So I wanna make sure this is combined all the way before I add it to my mixer. So got that all whisked together. Add it all in at once. And then I'm gonna mix it. Sometimes I like to pulse it so the flour doesn't go everywhere. I'm gonna mix it just until it forms into a dough. I don't wanna mix it any longer than I have to because I still have to mix in my chocolate chips. So you can see that doesn't take very long at all. And in fact, there's a little bit that's not quite mixed in, and that's okay because I'm gonna yet again scrape my bowl. And then I'm gonna add whatever my mix-ins are. So today I'm using chocolate, and these are kind of bigger pieces than like the traditional chocolate chip. So I kind of went through and I really roughly chopped. So you might get kind of a big chunk, you might get a little bit chunk, or there's also gonna be some shaving. So there's gonna be kind of an interesting mix of chocolate, but this could be regular chocolate chips, white chocolate chips, nuts, dried fruits, pretzels, any kind of thing you wanna mix in. So I'm gonna go ahead and add this in. And again, I'm just gonna mix until it's incorporated. And it all looks like one cohesive dough. And that's it. Now it's time to portion. So here's an industry trick to clean off your paddle. You can use your spatula, but we can touch this with our hands because it's not ready to eat food. So I can take my fingers and get it off much quicker and much more efficiently than I can with a spatula. So just like that, I've gotten pretty much all of it. We need to make sure we're not wasteful when we cook. So this is a great way to basically get everything off of your paddle. So the best way to portion your cookie dough is to use some sort of ice cream scoop. That way every single cookie is the exact same size. In the industry, we typically have multiple size ice cream scoops. So every single cookie comes out the same size. So very important that you scoop the same way every single time. So I get some cookie dough in my scoop and I scrape it with my hand. Again, I don't have to have gloves on because this is not ready to eat food. And this ice cream scoop has seen better days, but typically it just pops it right on out, just like that. And then every single cookie you can see is exactly the same size. Now I am not gonna bake most of these cookies right away. Great thing about a cookie dough like this is that it freezes incredibly well. So for freezing storage, I put them right next to each other just to save room. This is a really common thing for pastry chefs to do to save space.
So I'm gonna go ahead and scoop out all these cookies and bake off just a couple to test it out, see how it went. So when you bake your cookies, you need to make sure there's plenty of space because they're gonna expand. I'm only baking 3 today, the rest I'm gonna freeze. So I know that I have plenty of space here. I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. And it kind of depends on the size of your cookies, how long that they will take. You're gonna wanna rotate them at the halfway mark. Otherwise, the back edge will brown a lot more than the front edge. The back edge is always warmer in your oven. So we're gonna rotate them about halfway and I'll show you what that looks like. So these cookies have been in the oven for 5 minutes and they were in my oven this way. So it's hard to tell, but the backs have a little bit more dryness than the fronts do. So I'm gonna rotate them like that. So when they go back in the oven, they'll look like that. And that's gonna help them bake more evenly. You can see that they've spread really nicely. But now we're gonna look for just a little bit of gold right around the edges. All right, so these cookies just came out of the oven and hopefully you can see there's just getting gold on the edges, but they also kind of look still a little translucent in the center, and that's exactly what we want. A lot of people think that these aren't baked yet, but as they cool and they set, that means the center is gonna be really nice and soft and chewy, which is my personal favorite way to eat chocolate chip cookies. I know some people like them crisp, but this is the secret to like that really soft center, is pretty much pulling it out of the oven before you actually think it's done. So we're gonna let these cool. All right, so it's time to assemble our gourmet s'more. So we have these chocolate chip cookies that I made with the Clementine Zest. We have our Clementine Marshmallow, but I'm gonna need some chocolate, of course. So I wanna use my absolute favorite chocolate in the world, and that is Valrhona Mangiare. So this is a really, really special chocolate to me. It's super duper delicious. It's got these really awesome notes of berry, especially raspberry. It's really, really phenomenal chocolate. So I'm gonna use that on my s'more. So I got my cookies ready. So I'm gonna add my Valrhona on here, just directly on here. And then I'm gonna get my blowtorch going. So remember, we turn it all the way on till we hear it, and then we click it. We make sure we're not facing anybody's face or anything. And then we're gonna go down really, really light because I like my chocolate just a hint warm. So I'm just gonna put a little bit. I don't want it to like burn or anything, so I just want to get it a little bit warm. And then I'm gonna toast my marshmallow with my torch. So I'm just gonna do that really gently. You know, everybody's kind of got a different idea of how they like their marshmallows. Some people like it really charred. I like mine a decent amount charred, so I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna turn it upside down on here, and I'm gonna get the sides going so I can get all that awesome toasty, and then my chocolate's gonna continue to soften because now my marshmallow is nice and warm. Oh yeah, that's the good stuff right there. Awesome. Then, of course, I can get my cookie on top. And that right there, my friend, it's just not a bad looking s'more. I would love to have that at my next camp trip, wouldn't you?